Hey, what's up? So I wanted to talk about the role that humor can play within horror today. I think this is a weird idea that humor plays any role at all within horror because horror is meant to be scary, right? Horror is meant to make you crap your pants or something. We don't typically think of horror as being something there to make us laugh. Whenever you're leaving a scary movie, you typically don't look to your buddy and go, hey, which part made you laugh the most? Unless it's garbage, in which case you do that. If something is good, if something is an effective work of horror, then it probably shouldn't be making you giggle, unless it's a comedy horror a la American Psycho or something like that. But I think that even in some of the best and most effective horror works, there's still humor in there. And again, this is weird because we typically don't think about it. Whenever we discuss horror, we don't normally discuss the role that levity plays. I think levity and humor and joy is really interesting in horror because it's there to kind of counterbalance the horror. I've heard the trajectory of horror games and films and books and whatever else be described as like a roller coaster before, where there's this intense build up and build up and build up and build up, and then finally the scare happens and it's like, ah, and you go down the ride and whatever else. And so I've heard scares described in horror movies as being like that, where it's like a build up, up, and then you have the scare and then it calms down for a bit, and then you have the build up, and then you have the second scare and then it calms down for a bit, and then you have the third build, and it's a pattern like that. So I think often we talk about jump scares. So I think we talk often about how to effectively scare people and what makes scares effective. But I think that a large part of it is the gap between scares. I think that a large part of what happens in between scares can determine how effective a scare is. Because I think that if there's too long of a gap in between scares, then I think that can make the audience bored. I think it can make them forget what kind of movie they're watching or what kind of game they're playing. But I think if there's too short of a gap between scares, if you have something scary and then you have something else scary, then you have to do one of two things whenever you have two scares that are close together. Number one, you either have to make it scarier, right? You have to kind of up the ante. You have to make the second scare bigger and badder than the first. And the problem with this is that it can push itself over into parody at certain points. Or if they don't do that, if they just try to be the same level as the first scare, then they just have to accept that the second scare isn't going to be as effective because the audience was just scared by the first scare, and so if they see something that is similar, they're not going to be scared by it. But at its best, I think that when properly utilized in horror, I think that humor can really serve to accentuate strangeness, and I think that it can make the scares scarier by lulling the audience into a false sense of security. So I've been kind of abstract up until now, so I wanted to give some very specific examples. So one of my favorite instances of this is the Silent Hill 2 elevator scene. James and Maria go into an elevator in the hospital in Silent Hill 2. So while you're going up in an elevator, this kind of game show host starts talking, and he starts talking about Silent Hill trivia.
Welcome to another exciting edition of Trick or Treat! Here you either answer the questions correctly and win a great prize, or fail to answer correctly and receive the punishment.
And so this moment is really strange. It's really strange. It's really kind of silly, actually. The idea of there being like a game show about Silent Hill within Silent Hill is just kind of silly and over the top, and I love it because it's strange. It doesn't fit in with the rest of the game. Silent Hill 2 is a brilliant game for a number of reasons, and I think that it's very deep. I think it has a lot of layered symbolism, but what is this supposed to be? What is this supposed to represent? And it's like, I don't know that it's supposed to represent anything. I think it's just supposed to be a weird kind of shocking twist, and the way it's shocking is by not being scary initially. It seems absurdist and it seems surreal. And keep in mind that before you encounter this elevator, then what you're doing is you're like fighting dudes out in the street, and then after this elevator, you're fighting dudes in the hospital, and then you go to the Otherworld hospital, which is all kind of messed up. And so this scene is really interesting in Silent Hill 2, and I don't hear it discussed that much, and I think part of the reason why is because Silent Hill 2 has just such a great story, so it's easy for something like this to get lost in the hustle. But also I think it's just weird. I don't know if people know what to make of it. I think it's brilliant because, like I was saying, it lures people into kind of a false sense of security by kind of catching them off guard and making them laugh, or at least I laughed whenever I first heard this. I mean, just listen to this.
Well then, everybody, thanks for tuning in. See you again sometime. Bye-bye!
Like, this is just absurd. It's silly. It's like, just like, what is this doing in a horror game? But that's exactly the thing, is it makes the scares more effective because you have something weird in there. I really don't think that you can know many things without knowing their opposite first. So for instance, it's like, how do you know the difference between light and dark without having seen both? And so in that same vein, how can you know horror if you haven't known peace or humor? Or there's a similar thing in Silent Hill 3, basically, where the game is, that game's really dark. That game's really dark. And I think visually it's a lot grosser and more disgusting than the second Silent Hill game. And I think it's just stranger overall. I think it has a story that's more difficult to grasp, but I love it all the same. It's one of my favorites in the series. So in Silent Hill 3, you go to visit the Silent Hill amusement park. Because if you're unfamiliar with Silent Hill, there is a Silent Hill amusement park. And not only that, it appears in the very first game. So, pretty fun. And of course the amusement park levels are just kind of gross and dank and whatever, but then there's this haunted mansion that you stumble into, and it's one of the funniest things to happen in any of the games in the series. Essentially the entire thing is just this big parody of haunted mansions, because you have this guy talking who's monologuing and he just sounds like he's so bored and he's like trying to be so dramatic at the same time.
Do you know why he said he killed his family? Because I felt I had to! Anyway, I'm lying. It's all just a joke. I wanted to scare you, that's all.
In Silent Hill 3, I think it's important to remember, is like a legit horror game. Like, it's legitimately scary. There are a lot of things in there that are like really gross and shocking and disturbing. So for it to pull something like this is just hilarious. I remember playing through this the first time and just being like, what is this? Like, it was completely unexpected. And again, it like makes you laugh because it's silly. It's like an intentional parody of horror works and of haunted houses. And so as you saw, the amusement park levels are what leads up to this. And so this is how they look. They are very gross. They're very dark. It's really hard to see anything through them. And then you run into the haunted house and then it's like, ho ho ho, there's a moment of levity, right? It's funny.
That's Danny. A quiet young man, but quite friendly as you can see.
And then the haunted house kind of ends in a really interesting way, which is that there isn't a serial killer that pops up and, you know, scares you. There isn't any kind of jump scare like that. Rather, it's Heather begins being chased by this like giant mass of energy. It's this giant mass that's like eating away at her and dealing damage to her. And you don't really know what it is. It's just a glow. So effectively, Silent Hill 3 lulls you into a sense of security by making you laugh at the haunted house, and then it kind of makes you go, what the frig is this? Because it's unlike anything else in the game. Being chased around by a giant glow of energy like this is not like anything else in the series, except for Downpour, which brought back like this kind of thing, but it was based off of Silent Hill 3. Because yes, in Silent Hill you have monsters, you have your Pyramid Head and your nurses and whatever else, and they are physical creatures that can hurt you, but what is this? What is this just glow, this red and orange glow? And it's weird, it's kind of spooky and scary because of that. It catches you completely off guard. So in Resident Evil 7, you're going through the house, and again, like Resident Evil 7 was the scariest Resident Evil game in years, like hands down, easily. So you're going through the house, you're killing guys, you're unlocking keys and health items and whatever else, typical Resident Evil stuff. And then you get to this kind of barn section, and then this loud music starts playing, and then you just start having to fight monsters that Lucas apparently trapped in cages and kept there. And it just feels so completely strange and otherworldly. It feels like a complete switch in what you've encountered thus far. And Resident Evil 7 is like the most disgusting game in the series, I think, easily. It's a game that is very strange in the series because the antagonists are so much more mean and malicious than anyone else in the series. And so I think in this instance, it's more the absurdity than anything else that caused me to laugh. I think it was more the switcheroo that happened with the tone, where it was just very serious and dark, and then all of a sudden you have this kind of like crazy, like, let's go kill some guys. So I think this example is really effective because it feels like it's making light of the rest of the game in a weird way. Because it feels like it's supposed to be like, Ethan, come on, kill some monsters. And so in doing that, it's kind of downplaying the rest of the game, and it's downplaying the survival aspects and how much he has had to go through. And so that makes you reflect on that. And so I think this scene, by playing directly against the themes and ideas present in the game, reinforces them that way. And I think it's just a really masterfully done sequence. There was a movie I saw a few months ago in theaters called Talk to Me. I don't really watch too many horror movies, but I think that this one was really good. It's not a perfect movie, but I think that it probably executed its idea the best that it could have been executed. Long story short, some high school kids get a hold of this hand, and if you shake the hand, then you can let a spirit possess you, and kids do it because it's fun. They get a high off of it, essentially. And so this movie does something that is very important for every horror work to do, which is to establish kind of a baseline. And I think really every story needs to do this. Every story needs to kind of establish a baseline and establish what things are like before the big thing happens. It's like before Frodo has to destroy the ring, you get to see what life is like in the Shire. Before Batman turns into Batman, you have to see what life was like for him with his parents, and see his mom die for the 1000th time. So anyways, I went into this movie, Talk to Me, completely blind. I didn't know anything about it. My buddy described it to me as like being a movie about a weird hand that lets you talk to ghosts. And I was like, that sounds really bad in like let's make fun of it kind of way. The movie starts off with a bang. Within the first 2 minutes, there's like a very brutal and sudden death, and it's like shocking, and it's like, whoa, this is okay, it's this kind of movie. And then the movie kind of lulls you back into a false sense of security. And the way that they do that is, like I was saying, the movie's about a bunch of high school kids. So it just kind of shows their life. It shows what their life is like before they get the ghost hand, which again is nothing new. That's a typical storytelling thing. And then you see how they play out their lives shortly after getting the ghost hand. And long story short, they party with it. They just get drunk and high and they let ghosts possess them. And it's really silly and stupid feeling. And it's this really weird thing where whenever I was watching the movie, I was like, oh yeah, this is gonna go to crap. It's obvious this is a horror movie. I didn't know anything about this movie going into it, but I know enough about writing and about horror and about storytelling and screenwriting, etc. I know enough to know that it's not just gonna be about a bunch of friends hanging out and having a good time for the rest of their lives. But the movie, just by showing the kids having a great time and partying with the ghost hand and doing silly stuff, it was able to get me to lower my guard enough so that way whenever things did go wrong, it was shocking to me because, again, I had been lulled into a false sense of security. So I think the entire point of humor within horror is to kind of pull the horror back down. It's to let you get calm, it's to let you feel safe, and then whenever the horror strikes again, then it's like, and it's scary again. Because I think what happens is, I think that if it's just scare after scare after scare, then I think that at some point you become used to it. So I think that if you have no scares, then that's not a horror movie. And then if you have a bunch of scares, then that's too much. And you might be saying, but wait, Noah, what about X, Y, or Z, which has a sense of dread and atmosphere throughout the entire piece? And there are a lot of things like that. There are a lot of things that just have this overwhelming, ominous feeling where it's something bad is going down. I know it. I think the movie The Witch is a great example of this, where the entire time I watched it the first time, I was like, yeah, this is bad. The entire thing, it's this is bad. Everything's bad. This is not going well. Anyways, this is my friend Black Phillip. He's a goat. Black Phillip, you want to say something for the camera? I'm a goat. Or I think Silent Hill 2, for instance, has just kind of this sense of dread about it, or Silent Hill 1, or Silent Hill 3, or Dead Space 1, I think has a just great, phenomenal atmosphere the entire way through. But at the same time, all of these examples kind of work based around the same rules. All of these examples at one point or another have some kind of build-up, they have a build-up, they have a build-up, they have a big scare, and then they have a drop, and then they have a lull. And I love Silent Hill, so that's why I keep on using it as an example. But you see this very clearly with those games, because those games take place in the real world, right? Even if Silent Hill is kind of switching things around and manifesting monsters, the game still takes place in the real world. So if you look at the structure of Silent Hill 2, for instance, you show up in the town and the first big area is the apartments, which are kind of weird and creepy, and then you leave the apartments. But they're still in the real world. You don't see the other world yet. Then you go to the hospital, you see the elevator like I was talking about, and you're still in the real world, and there are still enemies there, but again, still the real world. And then you fight the boss Flesh Lips, and then you are transported suddenly to the other world. And the other world is much more screwed up and scary than the real world. And then you beat the other world, and then you are transported back to the real world. And then you get to go to the next area. So there's a lot of running around between different areas, and so I think those count as kind of low baseline type deals. And then the stuff that happens in the real world, which is not as tense as the stuff in the other world, is a little bit higher of a baseline, and then it's the other world stuff where it really ramps up, and that is the big scare. And when I'm saying big scare, A big scare is something that can be extended across a long period of time, like the other world Silent Hill levels are. Though I think if you wanted to break those down, then you could see how even those levels are kind of built around the same mechanics, where it's like big scare, pause, build up, big scare, pause, build up, big square. I said big square, didn't I? And so anyways, I don't think you have to have humor in your horror stuff, but I do think that it can play a fun role sometimes if it's well executed. I think that humor, when executed properly, can convey a sense of realness to the game, because normal people make jokes in horrible situations all the time, but also I think it can have the opposite effect, where it just makes the game feel that much more strange. So in short, I think that humor just serves to let tension lower in horror, which then allows it to rise and scare you again. So anyways, hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for watching. Have a nice night.
You're still alive.
Heather?
Just a joke.
You've got terrible taste.
Sorry.
I hope you enjoyed your tour. Please come back anytime. Or if you'd prefer, we could come and visit you instead.